Their message was never meant to be heard. Humans heard it and saved them. The signal in the static pressed his calloused fingers against his temples, trying to push away the headache that had been building for 3 days. The mining station's communication array crackled with the usual static: solar interference, atmospheric distortion, and the endless chatter of freight haulers moving between the asteroid belts. But there was something else, something that made his teeth ache. "Still hearing ghosts," called from across the cramped communications bay. The younger technician was hunched over his console, running diagnostics on the quantum relay systems that kept their little outpost connected to the rest of human space. "Not ghosts," muttered, adjusting the frequency filters for the 100th time that shift. "There's a pattern in the background noise, been there since Monday." Rolled his eyes. "You've been working deep space comms for 15 years. Your brain's just making patterns where there aren't any, like seeing faces in clouds." Wanted to argue, but he couldn't explain what he was hearing. It wasn't voices or music or even coherent signals. It was more like crying, a low, mournful sound that seemed to weave through the electromagnetic spectrum like a lost soul searching for home. The mining station Prometheus hung in the shadow of 442b, a rocky world that the consortium had claimed 50 years ago. The aliens were decent neighbors, quiet, methodical, and completely uninterested in human culture beyond basic trade agreements. Their cities dotted the planet's surface like geometric jewels, all clean lines and crystalline spires that caught the orange light of the system's dwarf star. Had been monitoring their communications for 5 years now, ever since the Terran Communications Authority had assigned him to this backwater posting. They used quantum entanglement networks for their important messages, but they still maintained old-fashioned radio systems for mining operations and atmospheric monitoring. Most of their chatter was as boring as watching paint dry, shift reports, supply requests, weather updates. But this signal was different. He pulled up the spectral analysis on his secondary monitor, watching the wave patterns dance across the screen like aurora in a digital sky. The frequency was too low for standard communications, too regular for natural phenomena. And underneath it all, that sound that made something deep in his chest ache with sympathy. "I'm taking this to Station Chief," said, copying the signal data to a secure drive. "Good luck with that," didn't look up from his console. "She's been in meetings with the consortium all week, something about expanding mining operations in the southern hemisphere." Paused at that. They were notoriously cautious about their environment. They'd rather spend 10 years studying the ecological impact of a new mining site than risk damaging their pristine world. For them to be discussing expansion so quickly was unusual. He made his way through the station's narrow corridors, past the hydroponics labs where Dr. Sarah grew fresh vegetables in recycled soil, past the machine shop where Tom crafted replacement parts from asteroid metals. Prometheus was home to just 43 humans, a tiny outpost in the vast emptiness between stars. Most days felt like they were the only people in the universe. Station Chief's office overlooked the planet through a reinforced viewport that stretched from floor to ceiling. The cities sparkled like circuits on a motherboard, connected by maglev transport lines that glowed soft blue in the twilight. It was beautiful, in an alien sort of way. "Chief, I need you to listen to something," said, holding up the data drive. Looked up from her holographic displays with tired eyes. She was a small woman with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from 20 years of deep space assignments. "If this is about requisitioning new equipment for the comm array, the answer is still no. Budgets than a vacuum seal." "It's not about equipment." He plugged the drive into her console and called up the audio file. "I've been picking up an anomalous signal for 3 days now. Listen." The office filled with static, then underneath it, that low, mournful sound that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Frowned, leaning forward in her chair. "Play it again," she said quietly. Obliged, watching her face as the strange signal filled the room. Her frown deepened. "That's not," she said after a long moment. "I've heard their languages, all 4 of them. This is something else entirely." "Could be a natural phenomenon," offered, though he didn't believe it himself. Shook her head. "Natural phenomena don't repeat in perfect intervals. How long did you say this has been going on?" 3 days. Started right after the consortium delegation arrived from The chief's eyes sharpened. "The delegation that's been in closed-door meetings with our contacts. the ones discussing new mining operations. Nodded. A chill was starting to build in his stomach, the same feeling he'd had during his years as a communications specialist in the Terran Marine Corps, when intercepted enemy chatter suggested an incoming attack. Stood up and walked to the viewport, staring down at the alien cities. I want you to run a full spectrum analysis on that signal, check every frequency, every possible encoding method, and I want you to do it quietly. You think something's wrong down there? She didn't answer immediately. In the distance, one of the transport lines flickered and went dark, then another. Watched as entire sections of the city grid began shutting down in sequence, like a wave of darkness rolling across the planet's surface. Chief, he started to say. I see it. Her voice was grim. Whatever that signal is, I don't think it's coming from our neighbors. I think it's coming from someone else entirely, someone who's been trying very hard to stay hidden. The last transport line went dark, and the planet below them fell into an unnatural silence. In the communications bay, alarms began to sound as the station's quantum relay systems registered the complete loss of surface contact with the consortium. And in the static between stars, that mournful cry continued, as if someone, or something, was screaming into the void for help that would never come. The hidden truth. The emergency meeting convened in the station's main conference room at 300 hours. Chief had called in the department heads, Doctor from Life Sciences, Tom from Engineering, Dr. Cross from Xenobiology, and from Communications. The holographic display showed the planet below, now completely dark except for the faint glow of bioluminescent forests near the polar regions. Status report, said without preamble. Dr. Cross, a tall woman with prematurely white hair, spoke first. All quantum communication with the consortium has ceased. No response to standard hails, no automated system acknowledgments. It's like they just vanished. That's impossible, Tom interjected, his thick accent carrying the skepticism of an engineer who'd seen too many systems fail for mundane reasons. You don't just lose an entire planetary civilization overnight. Power grid failures, maybe, but not total communication blackout. Cleared his throat. Unless they didn't vanish, unless they were never the ones we were talking to. All eyes turned to him. He activated his portable display, showing the spectral analysis of the mysterious signal. I've been running deep analysis on this anomalous transmission, he said. The signal originates from multiple points across the planet, but they're not coming from the cities. They're coming from underground. Doctor leaned forward, studying the data. How far underground? Deep, maybe 3 kilometers in some places. The signal strength suggests whoever's sending this is using considerable power to punch through that much rock and metal. Metal asked. Nodded grimly. That's the interesting part. I've been comparing geological surveys with the signal origins. Every transmission point corresponds to locations with high concentrations of rare earth metals, exactly the kind they have been mining for the past 50 years. The conference room fell silent. Dr. Cross was the first to speak. Are you suggesting there's another species down there, living underground while the mine above them? I'm saying the mathematics don't lie, replied. But there's more. I finally managed to isolate and decode part of the signal. It's not random at all. He activated the audio system, and the mournful sound filled the room. But this time, he'd processed it through every decryption algorithm in the Terran database. Slowly, patterns emerged, rhythmic pulses, tonal variations, mathematical sequences. It's a language, Doctor whispered. More than that, said. It's a distress call. I can't translate most of it, but the mathematical components are universal. They're giving us coordinates, population numbers, and... He paused, checking his notes. They're counting down. Counting down to what? Brought up another display showing the signal's evolution over the past 3 days. The intervals were getting shorter, the distress signatures more urgent. I think they're dying, he said quietly. Whatever's happening down there, they're running out of time. Tom stood up abruptly. This is insane. You're telling me there's a whole civilization living under the planet that they have been systematically mining for 50 years, and nobody noticed. Dr. Cross was studying the geological data with growing alarm. Actually, it makes sense. They always insisted on specific mining locations. They said it was for optimal resource extraction, but what if they knew? What if they've been deliberately mining around inhabited areas? Or targeting them, said grimly. Think about it. An underground species would be vulnerable to seismic activity, changes in groundwater, toxic runoff from surface operations. If you wanted to eliminate them without outright warfare, you'd make it look like an accident, finished. Environmental catastrophe, natural disaster. Doctor was running calculations on her tablet. The timeline fits. Mining operations have intensified dramatically over the past year. If there was an underground ecosystem, the sustained excavation could destabilize entire regions. Stood up and began packing. We need more information. Can you get a better translation of that distress call? I'll try, but I need more computing power and time. Time we might not have, she said, looking at the countdown data. Tom, what would it take to send a probe down to one of those signal sources? The engineer was already pulling up schematics on his tablet. Couple of hours to modify one of our mining drones. Add deeper drilling capacity, better sensors, maybe a quantum communicator for real-time data link. But Chief, he looked up at her with concern. If we do this, we're officially interfering in internal affairs. The consortium won't be happy. The consortium isn't answering our calls, replied. For all we know, something's happened to them too. Dr. Cross cleared her throat. There's something else we should consider. What if the delegation that arrived 3 days ago wasn't here for expanded mining operations? What if they came to implement a final solution? The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Thought about the perfect timing, the delegation's arrival, the mysterious signal's urgency, the complete communication blackout. Chief, he said slowly, when I was decoding the signal, I found something else. The mathematical sequences aren't just coordinates and population counts. They're also broadcasting on frequencies that match human neural patterns. Turned to stare at him. What does that mean? It means whoever's down there designed their distress call specifically to be noticed by humans. Not any other species we know of. Just us. Why? Brought up a final display. A comparison of the signal patterns with human brain wave data from medical databases. Because we're the only species in this sector with the neural architecture to hear emotional content in electromagnetic signals. They experience the universe primarily through chemical gradients and quantum field fluctuations. To them, that distress call is just background noise. Doctor was staring at the data with growing excitement and horror. They're crying for help, and we're the only ones in the galaxy who can hear them cry. The lights in the conference room flickered as the station's power systems automatically adjusted to compensate for the planet's missing energy signature. In the darkness below, an entire civilization was screaming into the void, hopping against hope that someone would listen. And now someone had. Looked around the table at her small crew, a communications specialist, an engineer, a life sciences researcher, and 43 humans against whatever was happening on the world below. Tom, she said quietly, how fast can you get that probe ready? 6 hours, maybe 4 if I skip the safety protocols. Skip them. I want every piece of data you can extract from that signal. Names, locations, anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with. And if the consortium contacts us. Walked back to the viewport, looking down at the dark planet that held so many secrets. Then we tell them the truth, that we heard something they couldn't, and we're not going to let it die in silence. First contact underground. The modified probe descended through 442B's atmosphere like a metal teardrop, its hull glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Watched its telemetry from the communications bay while Tom monitored the drilling systems from engineering. They'd managed to pack the probe with everything they could think of: ground-penetrating radar, atmospheric analyzers, quantum communicators, and a basic AI translator loaded with every linguistic database in human space. Probe is at 20 kilometers altitude, Tom's voice crackled over the comm. Beginning descent to coordinates provided. The signal source was located beneath what appeared to be an abandoned mining site in the planet's northern hemisphere. Satellite imagery showed the familiar geometric patterns of excavation, perfectly circular extraction points connected by ruler-straight transport channels. But the mining equipment was gone, leaving behind only earth and deep, water-filled craters. Atmospheric composition is within normal parameters, Doctor reported from the Life Sciences lab. Oxygen-nitrogen mix similar to Earth, though with higher carbon dioxide levels, could support human life with basic filtration. Fine-tuned the probe's receivers as it descended. The mysterious signal was getting stronger, more complex. His translation algorithms were starting to pick up what might be actual words, concepts that translated roughly to help, dying, and something that kept repeating, a word that seemed to mean remember. Contact with surface in 30 seconds, Tom announced. The probe's cameras activated, showing a bleak landscape of torn earth and toxic-looking pools. But as watched, something moved in the shadows of the deepest craters, shapes that looked almost like. "Are those buildings?" Dr. Cross asked from beside him. She'd come to watch the descent, her xenobiology background making her invaluable for first contact protocols. Enhanced the image. What he'd initially taken for rock formations were actually structures, graceful, organic-looking constructions that seemed to grow from the earth itself rather than being built upon it. They were partially collapsed, their surfaces and broken. "Those aren't architecture," Dr. Cross said. "Build with geometric precision. These structures follow organic patterns, spirals, natural growth matrices." The probe touched down with a gentle thud, its sensors immediately beginning deep scans of the surrounding area. The ground-penetrating radar revealed a stunning truth. The surface structures were just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the earth lay an entire city, its tunnels and chambers extending down for kilometers. "My God," Tom whispered over the comm, "there's a whole civilization down there." The probe began drilling, its diamond-tipped bore punching through rock and earth toward the strongest signal source. As it descended, the mysterious transmissions grew clearer. Translation software was working overtime, building vocabularies from context and repetition. At 3 kilometers depth, the drill broke through into open space. "We've got atmosphere," Tom reported. "The probe's atmospheric sensors are reading. Wait, this can't be right. The air down there is cleaner than the surface." Deployed the probe's camera and lighting systems. What they revealed took his breath away. The probe hung in a vast underground chamber, its walls covered with what looked like living light. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed and flowed across surfaces that seemed part grown, part carved. The architecture was breathtakingly beautiful, organic curves that followed natural mathematical principles, creating spaces that felt both alien and somehow familiar. But the chamber was damaged. Great cracks ran through the walls, and sections of the ceiling had collapsed. Water seeped through the fissures, pooling on floors covered with what looked like the remains of delicate machinery. And in the center of the chamber, huddled around a device that pulsed with the same rhythm as the distress signal, were the survivors. They were roughly humanoid, but their skin had a translucent quality that revealed the flow of luminous fluids beneath. Their heads were elongated, with large eyes adapted for the underground environment. Their hands ended in delicate, multi-jointed fingers that moved over their communication device with the precision of master craftsmen. There were only 12 of them left. Enhanced the probe's audio pickups, and the chamber filled with the sound of their voices. The same mournful tone he'd been hearing for days, but now he could hear the individual speakers, voices raised in what sounded like a chorus of grief and determination. His translation software suddenly came alive, words and meanings cascading across his screen. "Remember us, remember our songs. The deep places are broken. The waters rise, remember." "They're recording their history," Dr. Cross said, her voice filled with awe and horror. "They know they're dying, so they're trying to preserve their culture, their knowledge." One of the beings looked up directly at the probe's camera, as if sensing the presence of observers. Its large eyes seemed to convey a depth of intelligence and sadness that made his chest tighten. The being spoke directly to the camera, and the translation appeared on screen. "We are the Whisper Singers, children of the deep places. We have lived in harmony with the stone and the flowing water for 10,000 cycles. The Sky Dwellers came with their fire tools, breaking our halls, poisoning our streams. We do not blame them. They did not know we existed. But now the deep places collapse, and we are the last voices of our people." Leaned forward, his heart pounding. This was first contact with a previously unknown species, and he was witnessing their final moments. The being continued. "We have sung our distress to the void, hoping the Sky Dwellers might hear and understand. But they cannot hear our songs as we sing them. Their minds move in different patterns." Another being joined the first, its voice adding harmonies to the translation. But there are new sky dwellers, different ones. Their minds touch the void in ways that echo our own songs. We have shaped our distress to match their patterns, hoping they might hear where others cannot. Realized with a shock that they were talking about humans. Somehow, these underground dwellers had analyzed human neural patterns and modified their distress signal specifically to be audible to human consciousness. "They've been calling to us," he whispered to Dr. Cross. "Not to us specifically." The first being looked directly at the camera again, and when it spoke, could swear he heard hope in its translated voice. "If you can hear our song, sky dwellers with minds like void swimmers, then perhaps there is still time. The breaking comes in 2 cycles of the deep fire. When the great machines return to finish their harvest, the last deep places will fall, and our voices will join the eternal silence." The image cut out as debris from a minor ceiling collapse struck the probe's camera. But the audio continued, carrying the voices of the whisper singers as they returned to their task of preserving their dying civilization. Stared at his screens, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. An entire species, ancient and beautiful, was about to be wiped out by mining operations. And they'd spent their final days crafting a distress call that only humans could hear, betting their survival on the compassion of strangers. 2 cycles of the deep fire, Dr. Cross said quietly. "What do you think that means?" Was already running calculations, comparing the whisper singers' time references with local astronomical data. Based on the planet's rotation and the geothermal activity in that region, I think they're talking about 48 hours, maybe less. The comm system crackled to life with Tom's voice. "I'm reading massive seismic activity across the mining regions. Something big is moving down there." Through the probe's damaged sensors, they could hear it, a low rumbling that seemed to shake the very foundations of the underground world. The mining equipment was returning, and this time, it sounded like they intended to finish the job. The Whisper Singers' song grew more urgent, their final plea echoing across the void between worlds, carried by hope and desperation in equal measure. And somewhere in the darkness above, Station Chief was making decisions that would determine whether that song would be the last cry of a dying species, or the beginning of an impossible rescue. Part 4, The Weight of Truth. Station Chief stood before the main display in the command center, studying surveillance footage that chilled her to the bone. Mining ships were descending from orbit like mechanical locusts, their hulls by decades of industrial use. But these weren't the careful, methodical operations she'd observed for 5 years. These ships carried deep-core plasma miners, equipment designed to strip entire planetary layers down to bedrock. "How long until they reach the coordinates where we found the Whisper Singers?" she asked. Ran the calculations on his tablet, his face grim. 36 hours, maybe less if they work in shifts. "Chief, those plasma miners will turn everything within 50 kilometers into molten slag. There won't be anything left to save." Dr. Cross leaned over the sensor readings from the probe. "The survivors we found aren't the only ones. I'm detecting life signs throughout the underground network, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. They're scattered across multiple chambers, probably the remnants of a much larger civilization." "Can we contact them directly?" asked. Nodded. "The probe's quantum communicator is still functional. I've managed to establish a basic dialogue with the group we found. Their leader, they call her the Memory Keeper, says she's willing to speak with us." "Put her through." The main display flickered, then resolved into the image of the underground chamber. The 12 Whisper Singers had gathered around their communication device, but now one of them stepped forward. She was smaller than the others, her bioluminescent skin patterns more complex, and when she spoke, her translated voice carried an authority that transcended species. "Sky dwellers who hear our songs," she said. "I am Al, keeper of the deep memories. We have waited 10 cycles for someone to answer our call." Stepped forward. "I'm Station Chief of the human outpost Prometheus. We've only just discovered your existence. Can you tell us what's happening down there?" The Memory Keeper's large eyes seemed to focus directly on through the camera. "The sky dwellers who claimed our world 50 cycles ago have been harvesting our deep places. They take the metals that form the bones of our halls, the rare elements that flow in our streams. With each harvest, more of our world collapses." "Do they know you're down there?" A pause filled with something that might have been bitter laughter. "They know, sky dweller, they have always known. Their first surveys detected our cities, our population centers, but they chose to classify us as, how do your languages put it, non-sentient cave fauna. Dr. Cross stepped into view of the camera. That's impossible. Your architecture alone proves advanced intelligence. Your communication systems, your preservation of cultural data. We do not use metal tools, Al said simply. We do not build with geometric precision. We do not transmit on their approved frequencies. Therefore, in their legal framework, we do not qualify as intelligent life. The implications hit like a physical blow. They've been committing genocide, and they've made it legal by redefining intelligence. The consortium's mining charter specifically excludes protection for non-technological species, Dr. Cross said, her voice shaking with anger. I remember reading it 5 years ago. I thought it was just bureaucratic language to cover mining operations that might disturb animal habitats. Was studying readings from the probe's extended sensors. Chief, I'm picking up communications between the mining ships. They're not speaking standard. This sounds like military command protocols. He patched the intercepted signals through the translation system. What they heard made the temperature in the command center seem to drop by 10 degrees. Sterilization Protocol 7 is in effect. Deep core mining will commence at 600 local time. All remaining biological contaminants in extraction zones will be eliminated. Consortium Legal Department confirms no sentient rights violations. Biological contaminants, Doctor repeated from her position at the Life Sciences console. They're talking about the Whisper Singers like they're bacteria. Al had been listening to the intercepted transmissions, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a calm acceptance that was somehow more heartbreaking than anger would have been. We have known this day would come, she said. Our deep seers calculated the mathematical certainty seasons ago. This is why we changed our song, why we sang to the void swimmers among the sky dwellers. We hoped you might remember us when we are gone. We're not going to let you die, said firmly. Sky dweller, you are 43 souls on a small station. The consortium controls this system with hundreds of ships and legal authority granted by the Galactic Trade Federation. What could you possibly do? Looked around the command center at her small crew. 43 humans against an interstellar corporation backed by military force and legal precedent. The rational choice was obvious. File a protest with the appropriate authorities, hope for the best, and try not to think about the thousands of voices that would fall silent while bureaucrats debated definitions of intelligence. But as she watched the memory keeper tend to her dying people, something stirred in his chest. It was the same feeling that had driven her to join the Terran Marines 25 years ago, the same conviction that had led her to volunteer for the most remote postings in human space. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight was impossible to win. Tom, she said, what kind of defensive capabilities do we have? The engineer looked up from his console with surprise. Chief, we're a mining station. We've got hull integrity shields, some basic point defense systems for asteroid impacts, emergency thrusters for orbital adjustments. We're not exactly a warship. What about the mining equipment, the industrial fabricators? Tom's eyes began to shine with understanding. Well, if you're not too worried about warranty coverage, the asteroid miners use fusion charges that could be repurposed as weapons. The fabricators could manufacture just about anything if we fed them the right materials, and the main reactor puts out enough power to run a small city. Dr. Cross was staring at with growing alarm. Chief, you're talking about declaring war on the consortium. That's exactly what I'm talking about, cut her off. Al, how many of your people are still alive down there? The memory keeper consulted with several others in the chamber, their bioluminescent patterns flickering in rapid communication. Across all the deep places, perhaps 12,000 remain. Most are young or old, those who could not flee to the deeper sanctuaries when the harvesting began. And how long would it take to evacuate them if we could provide safe transport? Evacuate? Al's translated voice carried confusion. Sky Dweller, we are creatures of the deep places. We cannot survive long in the harsh light and thin air of the surface. And even if we could, where would we go? This world has been our home for 10,000 cycles. Was running calculations on his tablet. Chief, there might be another option. The planet has extensive cave systems in the southern hemisphere, areas the consortium hasn't touched yet, if we could move the Whisper Singers there. The southern sanctuaries were abandoned long ago, Al said. The deep fires went cold, the streams ran bitter. It would take generations to make them habitable again. Not if we helped, Doctor interjected. Human terraforming technology could restore those caverns in months instead of generations. Geothermal taps for power, atmospheric processors for air quality, hydroponic systems for food production. Looked at the memory keeper through the display. Al, if we could give you a new home in the southern sanctuaries, and if we could hold off the consortium long enough to evacuate your people, would you trust us to try? The Whisper Singer stood in silence for a long moment, her bioluminescent patterns shifting through what might have been contemplation or prayer. Finally, she spoke. Sky Dweller, your species has only known of our existence for one day, yet you speak of risking everything to preserve us. Why? Thought about her answer carefully. How could she explain the human concept of moral obligation to an alien who had watched her civilization die slowly over 50 years? Because, she said finally, we heard you singing, and once you've heard someone cry for help, you can't just walk away. Al's patterns brightened, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something that might have been hope. Then we will trust in the song hearers, but know this, Sky Dweller, the consortium will not simply allow you to interfere. They will bring their full power against you. You may save our voices, but it will likely cost you your own. Looked around her command center one more time, meeting the eyes of each crew member. She saw fear there, but also determination. 43 humans who had spent years in the emptiness between stars and who weren't about to let a civilization die on their watch. Then we'd better get started, she said. The countdown had begun, and somewhere in the darkness between worlds, the fate of 2 species hung in the balance. Part 5, The Impossible Plan. The Prometheus hummed with activity unlike anything it had experienced in its 5-year operational history. Every corridor echoed with running footsteps, urgent conversations, and the sound of equipment being repurposed in ways its manufacturers never intended. In the main engineering bay, Tom stood before a holographic blueprint that looked more like abstract art than any rational design. You want me to turn our asteroid mining charges into what exactly? He asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Pointed to the tactical display showing the approaching fleet. Long-range EMP torpedoes. We don't need to destroy their ships, just disable their electronics long enough to disrupt their mining operations. And how exactly are 43 humans supposed to deliver these improvised weapons against a military fleet? Doctor looked up from her biochemical analysis station. We don't deliver them, we make them come to us. She activated her own holographic display, showing the planet's magnetic field lines and atmospheric composition. I've been studying the data from our probe, focusing on the Whisper Singer's bioluminescent communication systems. Their entire culture is based on electromagnetic harmony with their environment. Get to the point, Sarah, said from the command station. The point is that their distress signal isn't just a cry for help. It's also a precise map of their neural patterns and electromagnetic signatures, if we can amplify and broadcast those patterns on a planetary scale. Dr. Cross's eyes widened with understanding. We could make the entire planet sing their song. The consortium would have to investigate. Ran the calculations, but the power requirements would be enormous. We'd need to channel the entire output of the station's main reactor through the communication array. Which would probably burn out every system on the station, Tom added. We'd be dead in space. Studied the tactical situation on her screens. The mining fleet had taken up position in high orbit, their deep-core plasma miners already beginning to heat up for the assault on the underground cities. In 30 hours, the sterilization would begin. What about the evacuation plan? She asked. Dr. Cross brought up a 3-dimensional map of the planet's southern hemisphere. I've identified 17 cave networks that could serve as temporary refuges, but transporting 12,000 Whisper Singers across 2,000 kilometers of hostile terrain. We can't do it with conventional transport, said. But what if we didn't need to? What if we could move them through the planet's existing tunnel networks? He highlighted a series of underground passages that connected the northern mining zones to the southern sanctuaries. Most were collapsed or flooded, but a few remained intact. The Whisper Singer's historical data indicates these tunnels were once major transportation routes. With some engineering work, we might be able to clear them. Tom was studying the geological surveys with growing excitement. The ancient lava tubes are still structurally sound. If we could punch through the blockages with controlled charges, create temporary atmosphere locks for the flooded sections. It would take weeks of work, Doctor pointed out. Unless we had help from people who knew the tunnel systems intimately, said. She activated the communication link to Al. Memory Keeper, are there any of your people who still remember the old deep roads? The Whisper Singer's image appeared on the main display, her bioluminescent patterns shifting with what might have been excitement. The Deep Walkers preserve the old ways. They know every passage, every hidden stream. But Skydweller, many of the roads have been broken by the Skydwellers harvesting. We can fix the broken roads, said, but we need guides who can lead the evacuation. The Deep Walkers will aid you, but they ask, what of the memory?